good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are and whichever part of the world. My name is Abhijit Bhaduri, and today we are going to talk to you in the context of November being the month when a lot of writing takes place. It is meant to be National Novel Writing Month, but then again, I believe that it's an opportunity to celebrate all things which are pertaining to writing. It's such a vital skill. I certainly do believe so. But today we are going to talk about how can a newsletter be a very fulfilling part of this whole experience of writing. And I have with me today Kavi. So Kavi, welcome to the show. That's Kavi for you, and he's had a very illustrious career, working for many different companies, and now working on his own. He's self-employed like me. And one of the things we share is, our love for not just reading but also writing. And Kavi, delighted to have you here and learn from you about what keeps you going in terms of creating a newsletter. So, is newsletter really a good idea? Is it for everyone? Is it a niche thing? It's really like saying that writing may be for everyone, but writing a novel may not be for everyone, or writing poetry may not be for everyone. Is newsletter something for everyone? What would you say?
Yeah, thanks, Abhijit. Thank you. It's wonderful to come back and talk to you. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. So thank you for that. It's added pleasure that you're speaking about a shared interest of newsletters. I love reading your newsletter, newsletter writing. I've been at it for a while, and I can tell you very honestly, vehemently, it's not for everyone. It is a tough act, but in my newsletter I keep saying it's handcrafted with love. So if it is about that, then it's a different story. But it is a lot of effort, and we've got to be clear about why we are in it for. And if we are in it for being able to create and curate and share to a set of people, a set of ideas, then if it's an act of love, it's different. But if it's going to be an act, this is how I see it. If this is going to be an act which you're creating for some kind of specific value for yourself, well, it's possible, but I'm not sure if you're going to enjoy it that much. That's how I see it. How about you? I mean, I'm as much as you're asking me a few questions, I want to ask you a few questions as well today and learn from you as well.
Sure. So, guys, I mean, that is Kavi's newsletter. That link is coming up in the screen below. So, do sign up. It's one of my favorite newsletters. My only complaint is that, Kavi, you do it once a fortnight. It's every other Tuesday. And that is not often enough for me. There's so much of good content there. So, thanks. So, I started it predominantly with the idea of, my newsletter is once a week. So, it's a lot more frequent. But I kind of look at it as something that I read, which something that I tweet. I sort of really draw from that. Occasionally, somebody forwards me something, and it's anything that catches my attention, which I kind of pause and read and say, "Wow, I mean, that is pretty interesting." Then that features in the newsletter, but it's also a way for me to really track anything that I'm reading. And when I illustrate it, I remember it. That's always been my way of learning. So this is just, putting it. It's a method of work out loud, if you will. So I think it's just that. Yeah. So.
I'll give you an anecdote about how I got started. I have this huge appetite for sharing a lot of stuff that I read, because when you share, you're compelled to read more. At least that's how it is with me. So when I started out like that, two of my friends, unknown to me, exchanged few of the stuff that I had shared between them. And then both of them said, "This is that guy's share, right? I mean, he shared it with you as well." So both of them came back and said, "Why are you sharing it independently with both of us? Why don't you put it together and share?" That's about 3-4 years ago. That's how it got started. So there wasn't any calibrated attempt to start a newsletter as part of strategy. It was just out of sharing. So then what happened was I called it the Owl Dispatch. The Owl
what is that?
Yeah, so the OWL stands for our work in learning. So our work is learning, our work in learning. So all of my work is about learning and about how do we ensure that we keep abreast of work and social sciences and work related. What's changing in the world of work, what's changing in the world around work, and a dispatch around it. That's how the whole thing started, very playfully, just amongst a set of friends. And at the same time, there were a number of other newsletters as my own examples as well. I would closely work with very good colleagues and friends at Founding Fuel. They put out an excellent newsletter, and if you're
Or is it that's again one of my favorite newsletters as well.
yes,
Yeah, Founding Fuel is
excellent.
fantastic.
Fantastic daily, beautiful daily. I mean, they go at it with a certain rigor that's fabulous. So they do, and those were some inspirations as well. So then I started understanding that on the social media platforms, which I was frequenting since 2003, four, it was getting very crowded, it was getting very noisy, and it was getting more and more fleeting. There wasn't space for enough conversations, and there wasn't space for deep work. That's how I thought. And the newsletter for me offered a space for curating stuff from social media, but offered a space for me to go deeper and think and produce. So from what was wistful, just sharing with a group of friends, it became deep work. It's become deep work. And that's the space which I have traversed in the last 3-4 years. But it's like what I said. Sometimes I do regret because it's a lot of hard work in putting it together. but
Yeah.
but it's good fun after I've clicked on send. It's always good fun.
Yeah, so you've been doing this for about 4 years now.
I think so. 3-4 years. I published edition number 69 last week. So yeah,
Wow,
twice a month. Yes.
that's
So
brilliant. Yeah, I kind of sometimes think that did I bite off more than I can chew because it's every week. It takes a colossal amount of time to
that's right.
curate it, polish it up, right, check the typos,
Yeah.
and I'm prone to doing all of that. So look at that and then illustrate it. For me, the illustration part is the easy part, and then the rest of it is actually a lot of hard work. So it's that, but yeah, it's certainly fascinating for me to be able to do that. Um,
But
eh,
one question before I let you go off that. Why do you do it? What keeps you going?
for me, it is really a digital archive of whether it's my website or Twitter or the different kinds of things that I am reading, the things that I'm engaging with in terms of conversations. Those are in different platforms. So Twitter is probably something is just a link that you share, and then very rarely. And you are right. I mean, Twitter occasionally doesn't lend itself to a lot of conversation. So I actually do a lot of writing on LinkedIn in terms of the posts and sort of sharing things like that. And that gets me a lot more engaged conversation. So I certainly find that to be of value. But I also think that, when I illustrate it, sometimes I'll post it on Instagram. But Instagram is not a natural extension for me. YouTube is almost none at all. I really have to remember to say that, okay, this is something that needs to be there. It's because I also realize that every one of these platforms has a different audience. People
Yeah.
consume content in a different way. I've just started a podcast has a completely different audience group. So it is more from the point of view of the more diverse the audience group is, the more set of ideas you get in terms of the conversations.
That's
So
correct.
it's really that your ability to extend, especially because now you're sort of cooped up in the single room, then your opportunity to connect with the rest of the world. So I can't travel around, I can't meet you in Mumbai like I used to. So
Yeah.
then those are things that the digital platform gives you a virtual liberty, if you will. It's not
That's
really liberty. It's fake. In as much as when people say I had a virtual coffee party, it's a little bit funny to me. I mean, I can understand doing a lot of these conversations, but a virtual coffee party, that's a little. What do you think?
yeah. I mean, your boundary is your screen, as much as you
Yeah,
would.
I know.
reach across and touch the boundary is the screen. Um, the coffee party, the coffee is virtual, but if the conversations reach your mind and makes you think, then maybe there is a grain of truth in that as well.
Ah, so then what you're saying is it's not the again, I guess what you're really referring to, and what you talked about, the choice of the medium, why the newsletter. It's an opportunity to have deeper conversations rather than something
That's right.
which is very fleeting. In fact,
Yes.
sometimes the platforms call it a fleet,
Yeah.
and so it's all
Yeah.
of that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
true. When it comes to a newsletter, you call yourself a dispatch. I mean, technically, is there a difference between what a newsletter is and what a dispatch is? What is the I'm not an expert, so I'm asking you.
No, neither am I. I just called it dispatch because I was going to dispatch it from home. So that was why we started. And at the blog in itself, the owl stands for a lot of stuff that we do. We write on blockchain, we write on several other things, and the dispatch is the only one that we were going to send out to people. So I called it dispatch. So that's why the dispatch came up. After that, it's grown over a period of time. It's got its own life because people have wanted to contribute. There is a good friend, Deepak, who comes and makes the illustrations, who wants to be part of it, and he's a great friend, and he does that. There are other readers who contribute. So then I added a readers corner, so people write in saying, "Hey, this quote I found. Can you include it?" So it's organic and it gives life, to a lot of conversations around. So in a way, because it reaches the inbox and it's not as fleeting as a tweet, because if you miss it, you miss it. Because it reaches the inbox, and if it manages to clear your spam box and reach the inbox, well, there is
Yeah.
a there is a real chance that you possibly will open it and think about what's there, or maybe have a conversation about it. So my goal has always been: does it spur further conversations for you? You don't Please don't consider this as a finish line, but if this is a start line for you to go further on and investigate and delve on and think about, then the dispatch is working in some form. That's how the whole thing started. And that brings me to another question about how do you measure? And I want to hear your views and words on how do you measure the success of your newsletter? And lots of people have asked me, and I've been searching for an answer. I thought I'll ask you.
You know, it depends on what you want to measure. I have this very sort of love-hate relationship with the concept of measurement. Because I think the best things in life are the ones where there is no ROI. There's return on investment. Because when you and which is what I kind of think, that when people say I want to network, I want to network with you. Then there is just somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm doing that because I want to get something. Eventually, I'll come to it, whether this way or that way. But when you do a lot of things which are without, ROI, then I think it creates opportunities for you to really discover many of the things. Is a
Sure.
difference. What I say is between a guided tour and just sprawling around in a city. People
Mm.
have different preferences. Some people feel that, okay, if there are 13 things to see in the city, I can see all 13. Whereas my belief is that I would rather go to a city, chat with somebody, and sit down and share a coffee with that person, and sort of really know about what happens in their life. So
Yeah.
that for me is the city. It's not whether I did you see that building, did you see that. Maybe the answer is no. So for me, it is not really something. It's really like on where many of the places you look at number of people who consume it is a measure. It really isn't, because if people are not engaged in it, so you create a movie. It may have seen a house full, but nothing happened to anybody's life after that. So in my case, I would say it was not a movie worth making. What do you feel?
Well, for me, I've always been very
Non
much
ROI.
Yes. Non-traditional common ROI. So there are intrinsic rewards. The joy is in the creation.
Yes.
The joy is in the sharing. The joy is in the number of people, not the number of people, but people really coming back after some time and you wrote this over there, and that made me think. Can we talk about it? So those kinds of, even if it's one or two, and even knowing that somebody else has spoken about it somewhere, is good enough for me. It's not saying that the numbers are not looking good. The numbers tell their own story, but that's just one part of the story. It's not the full story. It's a very small segment. It's also some data that's available for you just to see. For instance, sometimes when the data is really low, you know that the spam filters are really doing something. So you know that there are other things to look at, but that's not the definition of success. The definition of success for me is, did I have a good time looking and creating this? That's number one. Number two, the other thing that I always look at is how many articles. So I write 800 to 500 to 800 words, and I put together five interesting curations from around the world, and that takes some effort. So for me, the metric is how much time did I really spend creating this, and how many pieces did I want to share but I could not share. So then it becomes a how did I go about picking these up? It's a real task. The writing I can do, but the choosing between the ones that I have shortlisted through the week, that is a tough ask. So that is my measure. And sometimes
Hmm.
when people come back and say that, you know what, that particular piece I really liked, I worked on it, I did something with it, then it gives a certain sense of, okay, it's made a difference to somebody, and that's how I worked on it.
What a lovely way to talk about how you measure it. Yeah, I think for me it's also a digital archive. Because I think I'm like immensely disorganized. I can never find something at a point of time, because somebody would say, wrote something about this, that, and the other. Can you forward that to me? I just found it very difficult. So I created my website first as one measure. Then I kind of thought that, okay, there are things that you know, there are things that I put on Twitter, there are things that I put on LinkedIn, all of which doesn't necessarily, is there something that I would like to share? The platform changes what you want to share and with whom.
Absolutely.
So I think it
Absolutely.
has been really that. And that's a great, it's been an interesting way for me to share a little bit more of work, and I've experimented. Sometimes I've said that maybe I read the whole article there, I tried that, then, I keep trying different formats and lengths and combinations. But I think I sometimes think, what did I not share? And because sometimes I kind of think that, maybe I can add one more. And then I say, no, I shouldn't do that. I should stick to the, because I'm not a very disciplined person, so I think that I have to really work very hard to keep that measure and say, okay, no more than this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it a better idea to be a generalist kind of a newsletter or a specialist? Because mine is like, it's about anything and everything. I mean, you talk about, from anything from watermelons to, tigers, and, books that I've read, and paintings I've seen, and macarons that I've eaten. It's all kinds of things. But yours is a lot more focused. What is better to do, Kavi?
I think what I mean, I've seen all kinds. Some of it very diverse, some of it very specific. I think it also becomes over a period of time what you're comfortable with, and what your audience, also your consumers of the newsletters also are comfortable with. I have because I think the newsletter fundamentally is a very democratic choice people have made to come to you for something, and they have the choice at any point in time to leave if that doesn't suit
Correct.
them. So I think that offers a lot of freedom to do what comes best to you. That's how I see it for myself. So my space for reading, and my space for working is in the space of work, learning, and the changes that are happening in society, the future of work, the future of change, what's happening in this space, what are some of the things that are happening at the horizon. These are things that interest me and that I naturally gravitate to, that I'm watching for those specks in the horizon. And that's what I naturally gravitate to. And therefore my reading and my interest is in that area, so I'm naturally good at putting things together from there. And that's something that I have stuck to. And social sciences and research, of course, I'm very, very, very fascinated by social sciences and research based stuff. What is research saying versus what's the common idea and belief around it, and just so that people are able to take better decisions. So these have become the mainstay over a period of time by default. It didn't happen by design. And then
Mm.
after some time, when I sat back and thought, must I change it? Must I do something very different? For me, there are constraints. The constraint is in terms of time. If I want to even construct it differently, then I have to invest a lot more time, and perhaps in areas that I may not have that much of a space and a mind space in. And therefore this is proving to be just good. But the bottom line for me is, people sign up for a reason, and they sign up.
Mm.
They don't sign up just like that. They sign up for a reason, and they go away if those reasons don't get met. So there is a natural
Yeah,
process
yeah.
of selection and deselection happening, and one must continue to do what one does best. That's my way of looking at it. What do you think, Abhijit?
Yeah, so I'm going to just also just share the links of your newsletter and mine. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see it scrolling, so you can sort of sign up and look at that. Um, w- for me, I think it's hard to say whether the newsletter chooses the reader or the reader chooses the newsletter, or is it the person who builds the newsletter chooses the reader. I don't have a very clear point of view, but I think that if at the end of each newsletter cycle, whatever that might be, daily, weekly, fortnightly, whatever you choose to do, if you find that fulfilling enough and energizing enough that you want to come back and write another one, I think that's a good measure that you are enjoying doing that.
Yep.
I also think that in my case, I see a lot more people who engage with me one on one, and they don't necessarily do it in the public forums, and that may be the nature of the audience that I have.
Yep.
So initially, I used to feel very disappointed that there weren't that many responses in the public forum, because that generates conversations amongst each other. Yes,
Mhm.
so am I having the conversations with the readers? Yes, plenty of them. But am I having the conversations with, let's say, are the people having conversations with each other? I don't know. At least I'm not aware of it. So I think that is one piece that I would sort of really look at. I think that I wanted to ask you: is there a if you had to think about since we are coming to the end of the, if there are any questions, happy to take your questions, guys. Please feel free to put them in the chat box, and then we can have either of us, and Kavi is the experienced guy. He's done this for 4 years, so all the tough questions will be parked towards Kavi. Uh, what is there an ideal? How does one decide if you are starting a newsletter? How do you decide whether it's a good idea to do it weekly or monthly, fortnightly? How do you decide? Do you decide it on the time that you can allocate, or what?
I think one of the important elements of the newsletter is to be able to stick to your schedule of delivery. If you're delivering it every week, then if you promise every week, we must deliver every week, and maintaining that consistency is important. So if somebody wants to start a newsletter, then it's tough work. So please look at, and that's what I would think, that it's important to look at your schedules, look at how much time and space you will have to be able to create something like that, and start conservatively. It's easier to go from I publish once in 3 weeks to publish once in 2 weeks to publish every week. The other way around may not be that good. So that's what I would think. It's important to be consistent. So look at different things that are happening at your work, your space, and then go about deciding that. There are also friends in the marketing world who publish newsletters for a very different reason. I mean, it's for the brand, for products to reach, and I think that's a very different category. It's a very different way of thinking about it. I think we're not talking about those kinds of newsletters. Abhijit, what do you think? And would you have a different take on the other marketing-led newsletters as well?
It depends on whatever. Yeah, I would say that it can be anything, because there's also now a fair bit of momentum that people. I see a lot of people who are able to monetize their newsletters also. Because sometimes I can really think that maybe there is some value in it, because for the sheer amount of time and effort that it takes, it's really like it would be nice if that would to be monetized, not for anything else, but I just think that there is that possibility. As of now, I am doing it, just because I like it and I want to keep a digital archive of all the things that I write and draw or read. So for me, that is good enough. But I think, I don't know, I mean, some point of time, I'll experiment with that also. I don't know. But yeah, there could be. So there is a question there from Anish. So he's asked a question. Are there tech tools that can enable delivery, tracking, progress, responses, interactions? So Anish, you're the expert. You should be telling us what are some of those things. But I publish it on Substack. I'll go first very quickly. Substack, when you publish it, it also tells you, the open rate, it gives you a whole range of statistics. I used to sort of look at it very diligently in the first 2 weeks. How many people it reached, how many opened it, how much time did they spend on it. They track everything. And then, I thought that I get a little distracted when I kind of tend to do that, because then I think I like to live my life, at least a large part of my life, I want to live without any ROI. So I like to do things, because the moment you start thinking of ROI, it kills the joy in that whole process, so so that's how I look at it. What tools do you use, Kavi? Ravi has also put it.
Yeah, I'm on Mailchimp, and the same kinds of data is available, but data is data. What you do with the data and what you choose to do as a result and consequence of the data is what counts. And it's important, because data helps taking a few calls, especially regarding, is it reaching, is it even landing? Forget the reading. Is it landing? Is it being opened? And all of that gives you insight, but not necessarily dictates what should be done because of it. So those are some tools that I use.
Perfect. Sudarshan, Ravi asks an interesting question. Content selection. Kavi, how do you make sure you're always adding value through your content? How do you sort of do that?
Well, I think it's not the intent is not to add value in a very deliberate way. The intent is to go deeper into a subject. So I'm not focused on adding value. I'm focused on dissecting a topic and trying to see how it can lead into conversations. So for some people, it might add value. For some people, it might not. So I'm not focused on adding value, but I'm more focused on this moment. How do I dissect this further? And it's just the innate curiosity in me just to go dissect it further. What's the research saying? What else is research saying? Who else has spoken about it? And that dissection gives insights to me that I present to people, that people sometimes find adding value. Thank you, Sudarshan.
Ratnika has a question. What are the open rates like of your newsletters, and do you measure that? And how does it affect your content? Kavi, did you want to have a go at that?
Open rates are like salaries.
How many? What percent?
Open rates
are
like
confidential. So I think then we should put that norm that you should never ask a newsletter curator the open rate. Is
you
that
don't ask,
what you're saying?
you don't ask the long distance runner the timing of the marathon. You don't ask a newsletter curator what's the open rate. You don't ask the employed person what's the salary. You know what all not to ask for.
Okay.
But for me,
Uh,
truth be told, for me it hovers around about 35 to 40%. It's a fairly
which I
good
think
open
is
rate control. Yeah,
yeah. So
that's
there's a LinkedIn user who says that there is so much clutter online. How do you add value to the readers with the relevant content? I think, if I were to just sort of look at that, I would say that would I find value? Each time when I add, I curated. What it means is, of all the many things I would have read, I'll pick up something which is there, and I would give myself the freedom that if I, in a particular week, if I don't have four or five of the pieces, I have only two pieces which I think are worth sharing, I would just put those two. That's the freedom I've given to myself. I also try and avoid adding more because, then it just makes you sort of very indisciplined because you know that you can always add two more things. So I don't do that. But I just stick to that number and I can reduce it. It's really like saying Twitter gives you 280 characters. You don't have to use 280 every time you tweet. Sometimes you can just simply say things with much less. Technology is there, so you have URL shorteners, but you also have the ability to just be brief yourself. So
yeah,
it's both.
that's right.
All right. Kavi, any closing remarks? And I'm going to share the newsletter, things at the bottom of the panel once again before we close. But thank you so very much, Kavi. Any closing remarks?
No, I think do read newsletters. Newsletters bring you the world closer to you if you choose them well. And that's exactly how you break the clutter that's there in the world right now. I'll keep it brief. Yes, over to
Perfect.
you.
Thank you. And for me, I think it is newsletters are easy ones to subscribe to and easy ones to unsubscribe. So I think it's a very low risk way to find out if there is stuff which is interesting. So one way I would do it is I would go through some of the random pieces from the archives and then just see if that's interesting. I subscribe to those and I find many of them very valuable. And certainly, so thank you very, very much for being there. 30 minutes on the dot. It's time to say goodbye. And all the very best, Kavi. Thanks a lot for sharing your wisdom. As always, couldn't be better. Thank you for being there.
Thank you, Abhijit. It's always fascinating to speak to you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom as well. Thank you.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.